Suzanna has a farm in Bennett's Bridge in County Kilkenny. She farms 12 acres, and where she has an average of about 30 ewes and followers, and she practices regenerative farming. So Suzanna, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. And we might just kickstart. You can just tell me a bit about your farm and how you farm, what exactly you farm and how you farm.
I farm about 12 acres. This is my mother's farm and my mother's land. It's been in our family for about 8 generations. My mother's family first rented it, I think, from 1800 to 1850. So the farm ended up being bought in the 1850s. And she rents a larger portion of the farm to another farmer. So I'm only farming about 12 acres around the main house. And I farm it regeneratively, which is enhancing the soil and the biodiversity with a flock of sheep and some alpaca and a few horses. And the sheep are a particular breed of sheep, which is, they're called Zwartblas sheep, which are from Friesland, which is the homeland of also the Frisian cow and Frisian sheep. And they are a trifecta breed of livestock in that their wool is really, really wonderful and can be used and processed into yarn and blankets, which is what I do. They're also a very delicious sweet meat, which I finish the lambs on clover and apples, and the herbed swords that they eat, which enhances the flavor of the meat, as well as one day, whatever permitting, I hope to milk them because they're also a dairy breed. And I make a mean sheep's milk ice cream, which is really, really delicious. Wow. I basically farm so that I have a value added product, which is I sell directly to clientele the meat. I have my sheep are shorn annually and the fleeces are saved, and then I get them processed at a local woolen mill called Cushendale down in Gregnamana, only 20 minutes drive from here, and they process it and clean it, spin it, and weave it to a blanket design that I created, which I then sell all over the world. So there's one end of value added. The meat is another value added, and my clientele comes to me directly. It doesn't go through, my lambs don't go through a factory. I also sell wethers, which are the castrated male lambs, to small holders, which then they themselves bring the wethers on to maturity for when they want to harvest them in the autumn.
Okay, so you know it's not a traditional route that you've gone down. You might just explain to us your journey, how you ended up with the Zwartblas sheep. Did you always farm with them, or you know it's obviously quite an innovative route that you've gone down? So how did you end up where you are?
Well, I ended up the way where I was. I had come back to Ireland after working for a wildlife charity in Southeast Asia, and my grandmother had just died, and I came back here to live because I was picked up a tropical disease in Southeast Asia, and I was very ill to begin with, but as I recovered, friends would give me Suffolk lambs, which I would raise on, and then I started breeding them with my neighbor's Texel ram, and the flock grew, and my neighbor said, "You're at nothing trying to be a commercial sheep farmer on such a small acreage. Go for a rare breed or the high-end pedigree." And at the time, I was teaching photography. I was teaching in Kilkenny about 4 days a week and 3 nights a week in Thomastown. And so I couldn't afford the high-end pedigree. So I went to the ploughing championships when I was here in Kilkenny, where I saw the Zwartblas breed and was completely smitten. And so I only started off with 3 ewe lambs and 1 in-lamb ewe, which multiplied, luckily, very quickly.
Okay, so you mentioned you sell direct to customer. Do you see a lot of merit in that?
Yes, I do. There's, I don't know if it would necessarily work on a greater, bigger scale. The small scale that I am, it definitely works. But I think that if you did have a route to market that is enhanced by a category, be it a pasture for life only, a mixed species sward grazed livestock that was had some form of guarantee and proof that this was how those animals were treated, you could go to a higher end market and have more people interested in buying a grass-fed, purely grass-fed animal that didn't have any meals of any kind in its finishing process. And this is absolutely possible with regenerative farming and mob grazing. And if you have particular breeds of cattle, it is absolutely possible. And what's so brilliant about multi-species swards are that the biodiversity enhances the nature. The animals self-medicate. You have the dung beetles. The dung beetles, when they're digging their holes under the manure, bring up the minerals. The plants take up better, richer source of minerals. Root structure is deeper, so you have better drainage. Also the deeper rooted of the mixed species sward can enhance the animal's health, and they put on weight better. And there's a lot of farmers, which is very interesting, going back to traditional breeds and steering away from a lot of the continentals.
So you mentioned mixed species sward there quite a bit. Did your farm, was it natural regeneration? Was the farm at an intensive level, or did you have to reseed? Was it natural regeneration? How did you get your mixed species sward, Suzanna?
Well, when I came home, the land for many years had been rented to a series of different farmers. There was sheep farmers, horse farmers, and beef farmers. And basically, they essentially would throw fertilizer on the land. So it was basically a ryegrass sward, and very little was tended to the grass. They grazed it. And it was, when I came home, it was basically ryegrass and thistles. And the whole farm was just, the soil was very, very poor and very, very, you'd walk across the fields and it would literally be thistles over your head and nettles over your head. And the orchard that we have was completely overgrown with ash seedlings, brambles, nettles, thistles, ivy, and all these kind of things. And for a environmentally friendly, biodiverse farm, it needs all different kinds of levels of swards and things like that, and not a monoculture or a bi-monoculture, which is what the thistles and ryegrass were. And I have at the front of the house, there's some land that my grandparents always had for making hay. And in that is traditional species, from knapweeds to oxeye daisies, ryegrass, there is ryegrass in it, cocksfoot, orchard fog, dogtail. Then there's all the vetches that go through the seasons. There's the purple vetches, the yellow vetches. Then there's bird's foot trefoil. There's salad burnet. So there was a huge variety of seeds that I would then collect. Around now is a lot of the time when you can collect these seeds. And then I would go out into the fields, and yarrows. Yarrows are very important with their deep seeds, just like the salad burnet. And I would collect these seeds and scatter them on places where the ground was a bit bare. And over time, the multi-species availed and prevailed rather. And so the sward became fantastic. And when we had the drought in 2018, I got very concerned. You know, the grassland all looked very burnt and dry. And so I said, oh, the sheep must be hungry. And I put some hay out, and the sheep kind of came over, nosed it, and said, nah, we're not interested.
Mhm.
And I went and I followed them, and they were eating the cocksfoot grasses, the salad brunettes, the yarrows, all the really deep-rooted herbs and legumes and grasses they could still eat. So they were fine. The only thing I had to do was, because the water kept getting cut off because of leaks in the local pipes, I would have to move the sheep. When they'd finish a tank of water in half a day, I'd have to move them to another field for the next tank of water for them to drink. So that was the only, and then at night the tanks would refill when they turned the water on. So they had no interest in the hay, and that was one of the first signs that I was absolutely doing the right thing with the diverse sward, with combined with the shallow root and a lot of the deep-rooted plant life.
Great, excellent. So, you know, you've obviously mentioned regenerative farming a bit, and you explained it a bit earlier, but you might just explain to me I mean, if someone was to say, so Suzanna, how long does it take to become a regenerative farmer? You know, I mean, or, you know, or maybe you could just also give, obviously you've mentioned some of the merits already, but some kind of key things that stand out for you. But, you know, if someone was kind of to knock on your door tomorrow and say, look, how long does it take to get there? And what are the first steps, I suppose?
Well, some aspects take a long time. For example, when you walk across the fields here, now that I've been farming this way it's now about 20 years, I think. It might be a bit less than that. I came back here in 1997, but I didn't really start farming the land until a few years later. The first thing that the texture of the land, when you're walking across some of the fields, it feels like you're walking across a mattress. And it's because there's so much organic matter that within the whole body of the soil, not just the thatching of the different herbs and things like that on the top. And that takes a long time because there's so much compaction on a lot of land here in Ireland because of so many tractors going over it, fertilizing it, cutting the silage, the compaction of livestock legs, feet, and things like that. And I had a very interesting experience about a week or 10 days ago when a sound engineer was here, and he said he could actually hear the difference. He records documentaries and things like that, and things for RTE and things like that. And my horses were galloping, and he said there is a definitive different sound even to the ground that has been regeneratively farmed. There's a deeper resonance to it than when he's been sound recording on other farms. And to answer your question, I've kind of gone off on a tangent, but that aspect will take time. But if you have the finances, you can get a multi-species sward sown into your fields in a spring season, full of plantains, the long plantains, the different herbs and legumes and grasses. And the more diversity you put in, the quicker the soil turns over back into life. Mm-hmm. And there's also a different form of management in that the rest period, the fields need a longer rest period. So a lot of Teagasc advisors and things like that say they only want you to, they want a 20-day rotation in the grazing, whereas with a diverse sward, a multi-species sward, it needs a lot more time to recover. So you have to do a form of mod grazing to give it a length of time. And with dairy farmers, it would be very easy to do this because they're basically bringing the cattle in twice a day and out again. So, I mean, if they'd set up a fencing system, they can do this. And there's some farmers who are actually already doing this. to great effect and huge savings. Because if you manage a diverse sward properly, you don't have your fertilizer bill, you don't have your herbicide bill, you don't have a lot of those other, you don't have to reseed as often. With a ryegrass clover mix, you can exhaust it. Sorry about all my dog noises. You can, you don't have to reseed it as often. It took me so long because I didn't have the finances to buy the multi-species seeds, and I did it literally gathering them by hand and casting them across the field in the bare patches. Mm-hmm. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great start. You were saying about the triflective breed that you have. It produces milk, it produces meat, and obviously the wool. So you have diversified into a number of different incomes. Now, you don't have to explain if you don't want to, but you're also involved in agri-tourism. So you've got, for your 12 acres, you've got a very diverse, different income streams, and I'm sure that's a lot of work, but there's probably a sense of resilience. Or do you like that you're not, all your honey isn't in one pot? So if you want to explain like what your agritourism business is, and maybe the merits of having maybe a diverse system on your farm and an education system, etc.
Well, it all essentially came through social media. People wanted to, excuse me, dog's barking again. It all came through social media that people started wanting to come and visit the farm. And it started off with student groups at a local cooking school, or there were also people who came from single tourists and knitters who wanted to come for shearing. And it just grew and grew kind of organically. Till last year, I had a good few tours. I think there was about 8 all told, that of the big tours. There was many, many more of like 2 or 3 or family groups. But the big tours were like between 25 and 40 people would come in a big bus, and we'd do a tour around the farm, and I would explain what I'm doing. And it definitely was a different income, and it added in, I had about 5 just exclusively knitting tours from people who would join these knitting tours, and they'd come from all over the world, and they'd do a bus tour around Ireland. And they would then come and spend loads of money on my yarn or my blankets and my books and my calendars and all these other things that I now sell all over the world via social media and via my website. And so the tour groups would be one income stream. The cards, calendars, blankets, and yarn would be another. Then there's the meat from the sheep. Then there's the book that I wrote, and that came through because of social media. Basically, I found that a lot of people didn't understand where their food came from, and the book evolved from this extraordinary cat I had called Bodacious, and I used the characters of the animals to help educate about food and farming and where it came from. And that way the animals could speak for themselves and make fun at us humans and things like that. And that became a book, which was another income stream. And so there's, I think I've covered all my income streams.
There's quite a few there. No, it's really interesting. I suppose just very quickly, a few questions are coming in, and I'm just going to encourage people, if they have any questions for Suzanna, there's a chat box at the bottom of the banner. Type in that, or else raise your hand and we'll get to you in due course. But just habitats for nature, Suzanna, for those of us who haven't seen your farm, what different habitats do you have, and what nature, like wildlife, is in has been attracted to these habitats? I know some of your neighbours are quite perhaps a bit more intensive than you. You've already mentioned that. So, I mean, is there a bit of a sanctuary there in your farm, and what habitats have you got? And what do you deliberately do for nature on your farm, for wildlife?
Well, every day I'm kind of essentially doing deliberate things for nature. We have a bit of woodland. Part of it is full of ivy. Part of it, I have slowly used the sheep to de-ivy, because ivy is basically a monoculture, and it only feeds animals at a small part of the year. So I have created a lot of biodiversity on the floor of the woodland. So there's a lot of plants that seed out for the moment. And if I walk into the woods without the dogs, it is full of bird life that are collecting seeds. Whereas if you walk in the part of the woodland which is covered in ivy, there's hardly any. It's like a desert. There are no birds in there. So instead of the ivy, lots of people say birds nest in the ivy. I'm encouraging holly in the woodland. And holly protects the small songbirds from the corvids, and particularly the magpies, who will attack nestlings because they don't want to go into the holly trees. Then we also have a small orchard, small by modern standards. It's just over, an acre in size. And no, it's nearly 2 acres in size, sorry. And so that has biodiversity in that, being an orchard next to a woodland. Then we have the hedgerows, the diverse swards. We have a lot of mature trees, and our family has always, every year, we're planting new trees. So there's always trees being planted. We have ponds and aquifers, so we have the frogs and the lizards and the ferocious diving beetles, which are extraordinary, and which feed on the tadpoles. We have huge population of tadpoles, and at the moment all the tiny little baby frogs are all over the orchard where a lot of the ponds are. I'm hoping to plant in a new hedgerow in the coming autumn to mature into next year, and that'll be all our hedgerows have the traditional things of the hawthorns, blackthorn, there's ash, but there's also the crab apples and hazels, and we have a laneway of hazels, so there's the hazelnuts. We have gray squirrels, but we also have the pine martens, and we also have the red squirrels. We have buzzards on either side of our farm that nested this year, so 2 sets of buzzards. We had we also have, at one stage it was thought, there was a book that said that the tawny mining bee was extinct in Ireland, and I had to correct the author and say, well, actually we have a fantastic colony of tawny mining bees, because they need the diversity of naked ground. For the mining bees need that ground. Then there's, I was saving a bat and I videoed myself, and somebody said, oh, that's a rare natterbat. So we have the rare natterbat. And our walls, I'm always, if we're repairing walls, I'm creating places for the birds to nest or bats to hibernate in the walls. It's always thinking of how to enhance it for the flora and the fauna, so that so no insecticide is used. I have used herbicides in the past, but that was basically one to help me get on top of the thistle problem, because it was just so horrendous. And because I didn't want to affect the clovers and all the diversity underneath the thistles, it was literally walking around and point spraying thistles by hand. It wasn't a machine going across the field and spraying everything, because I wanted the other herbs and legumes to. I haven't used herbicide now for a few years because I've gotten on top of the thistle issue. But it has taken a long, long time. It can be done much quicker than I did it if you have the financial backing. I had to do it progressively and slowly over time. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I mean, you've probably mentioned it, but is there one big success story for nature, like one animal population increase, or one thing that you've kind of gone, God, that's just brilliant, I'm so proud of that? Or
Dung beetles. I am so thrilled at how I have helped others find out and understand about dung beetles, because a lot of the livestock parasite worm issues, the medication doesn't really work very well anymore. And dung beetles and the mites that live on them can really help solve this issue. And I have been farming for the dung beetle, if you will, for a good number of years. And keeping if I have to worm some livestock, they're kept inside, because dung beetles won't go to a dung heap and they won't go into the stable and feed there. And basically, the best thing is, the last few years, I've been farming for dung beetles for a number of years, but the best thing was last year was seeing the increase of snipe and woodcock. And I couldn't figure it out for a little while, what they were doing in the fields, because, you know, they're kind of a marsh glade bird. But it was basically, I have increased the population of dung beetles to such a degree that woodcocks and snipe now come to these fields and hunt for the grubs. And, you know, they've got those long, long beaks so that they can go down into the soil and fish around and find either the dung beetles themselves or their grubs or their young. Mm-hmm. And so it's been really lovely seeing I used to have to, my cousin has a big farm just a few fields away. And I used to be able to see snipe and woodcock on a field that he has called the Big Bog, which had the perfect kind of moisture content in the land for the snipe and the woodcock. And we would have occasionally some here, but now they're all over the place. And so I'm very pleased about that. And that the buzzards feel there's enough food here. Mm-hmm. We have hare here with their last autumn. It was wonderful seeing 2 baby hare silhouetted. The land here is very rolly and hilly. And I was down the steep slope pulling thistles at this stage. I wasn't poisoning them. And I looked up on the horizon and I could see the silhouette of 2 baby hare loping along. And I said, oh, that's brilliant to see, knowing that the harvesting now of silage makes it a bit more difficult for hare to nurse their young, because the buzzard population love finding baby hare and swooping in and grabbing them. Mm-hmm. So there's the success. I could keep going on and on about the success stories, but those are a few that are very pleasing.
No, it's really nicely illustrated. Okay, well, I'm just going to move on to some questions here. Some questions were emailed into me, so I'll start with them, and then I'll move on to the questions that have been sent in to us now on the chat box. This one's from Betsy Townsend. Suzanna, how do you see farmers impacting the reduction in food nutrition? What can we do to turn that trend around, if any? By farmers, I mean small and medium farmers, not corporations.
Well, basically, food nutrition, if you have the soil right in regenerative farming and you have a crop rotation with livestock rotation, and you increase the nutritional value of the soil. At the moment, a lot of farmland is being fed a starvation diet of what is deemed essential nutrients to grow a crop, but not thinking of the microbial life within the soil. And the richer that life is, there's some fantastic books out now about how, if you're eating food, be it a head of lettuce, cabbage, or meat, that has been raised on a high microbial soil, the nutritional value is much more digestible and contributes to your own microbiotic life within your stomach and digestion, so that then you digest whatever food you're consuming much better, which in turn makes you much healthier. So if you have healthy plant life or healthy livestock that isn't dependent on a monocultured food for themselves, be that the head of cabbage or the sheep or cow, I think that there's a much higher nutritional as well as flavor value. Because if you milk a cow that is on a spring meadow of vetches and young sweet timothy and grasses, you get a really... Whereas if it's on a monoculture of rye, it doesn't have that richer content in flavor. So it's a combination of flavor and soil health, I think, is hugely important. This is a very important book that when I went to agricultural school was kind of the Bible of what we, the school I went to was in Vermont. And it was basically an early form of farming with nature. It was a grassroots agricultural college dealing with wildlife and forestry and agriculture and moving all of them together. So I had early days in kind of farming with nature and these kind of thing, this kind of farming kind of thing. Does that answer the question I have?
Yeah, no, I think it's good route. Okay, so there's another question here from Sophie Nicole. So, well, she's got a few actually. Her first one is, Suzanna, what is your marketing strategy and how do you attract tourists and make them aware of the farm? You were mentioning earlier, I suppose you've got quite a strong social media.
Yes,
yeah.
Very much on social media and engaging with people and constantly engaging with people. I'm very bad on Facebook, I'm afraid. I am much better on Twitter and Instagram. But see, also journalists are more involved in Twitter. When they pick up what you're doing, they pick up the want to write articles and things about it. That's essentially how my cat became famous, which became the tourists, which became the calendars, which became the book in the end. And it was a journalist for a farming magazine in the United States called The Modern Farmer. And he did this article and he said, look, before I publish this article, you might want to have something to sell. And so that was the creation of the calendar, the postcards, and the greeting cards. And there's something that's constantly trickling out the door and creating an income.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another question from Sophie is, what's the biggest challenge you find in your business?
Well, at the moment, having opened up for the tour groups is losing that income, but it's balancing out now with I'm selling a few more sheep than I did last year, and I'm also selling blankets and things like that. I think it's a combination of the weather and the finances. And when you farm for one aspect, you only have that one income. And with the diversity of incomes that I have, when one falls through the floor, like the tour groups at the moment, one hopes the other will balance it out. And it's kind of doing that at the moment. The only problem being that I've sold out of blankets and they're being done at Cushendale Woolen Mill practically as we speak. So I'll be having that income again. Mm-hmm. And I mean, during COVID, if I'd had not sold out of blankets, I would have been doing very well and not minded the tour groups. Mm. But I think it's having a diversity of incomes to fall back on. And the book helps. And it's communication and social media. I think a lot of people ignore the social part of social media. You have to you have to listen as much as you project out onto it. You have to respond to people as much as you post things. And if you don't do that, people lose interest. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very important aspect. And I think all farmers have something to say. I mean, farming is not easy in the best of times, and boy, oh boy, is it not easy in the worst of times. But during these times of COVID, I mean, we have been so lucky to be out in the rural areas. I think broadband has done a huge plus for farming, because I think farmers now have a voice as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where they didn't before. They were dependent on the huge the huge co-ops or the IFA or they had to depend on those kind of things. Whereas I am more now dependent on the people who I communicate on social media for, the calendar income every December and January when they're purchasing calendars and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting. And then the final question from Sophie, and then I'll move into the chat box, is we have an issue with a grazing field that is almost entirely populated with ribwort plantain in the last year, and don't know how to re-establish grass diversity without negatively impacting the field. Do you have any suggestions how to increase diversity of grassland without tilling?
Mob grazing is a fantastic way. There's a local farmer just down the road from me, and they had some bottomland that used to be really, really boggy. And they basically got a small herd of belted Galloway and something called a tumble wheel, which is an electric fence that rolls along when you move the cattle every day. And their land was desperate. It was compacted. It had like 3 cuts of silage off of it for many, 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 many years. And they have been mob grazing it. And they say within 18 months, the natural seed bank within the soil started producing more things coming up. And if using the tumble wheel, it makes it very easy, because you have 2 electric fences running along the length of the field. And then the tumble wheel rolls. You have one on either side. And you just move the tumble wheel electric fence along, and the cattle move with it. And you have to figure out something to do with the water tank. They have one that's on a roller, and they just, with a long windy hose that follows the tank to each paddock. But this increased their biodiversity of both flora and fauna. The other thing to do is, when the mob grazing is occurring, when the cattle are in a particular paddock, just before you open up to let them out, you can get bags of diverse seeds from somewhere like Cotswold Seeds, which have fantastic brochures. And they've got loads of information. I know it's an English company, but they've got the research and everything. And if you go to the back of their website and you tick all their catalogs, you get an incredible amount of knowledge as to how to resuscitate your land with a diverse sward, and what plants you need to sow in the field. They have, for example, something that I want to do when I can afford it, is they have a bag mix of seed that is for worming sheep. And I would love to make a small paddock, sow that in there, and then you let the sheep in there to graze once a week for an hour or so, and then move them on to the next paddock. And you can do the same with cattle. And that way you have you're also making it so that the dung beetle has a chance, and the livestock, because for the worming and everything. But mob grazing, a tight mob, dispersing seeds as they're walking through, and after a few years, you will have an amazing diverse sward in there, because there is the seed bank is in the field. It's just dormant.
Mhm.
It is there. It's just dormant because it's been hit by so much.
Very interesting. Okay. Here's a question from Shane O'Brien. Do you work with a local abattoir? What are some of the obstacles you've had to overcome in order to sell directly, in order to direct sell your produce?
Yes, there is a local abattoir. It is a little bit of a distance. I go to, it's up in Johnstown, and he takes my lambs, he hangs them for the week. He then butchers them to my clients' spec, what each, some clients want, you know, like a double chop, 2 bones on chop kind of thing, or single, or some don't care. They just want the whole lamb diced up. And what I do then is I bring it home, and it's the clients all come that day and pick up from when I bring it home.
Okay, perfect. Lucy Moore asks, is it necessary to worm your sheep, or do they succumb to any other pests and diseases?
Oh, there's loads of pests and diseases. For example, with thistles, you can have the problem with orf, where the sheep will prick their around their face, and they will get orf, which is a pain in the arse, which is why I try and eliminate orf from within the field. Sorry, eliminate thistles from within the field. They're in the hedgerows, but I try and keep them out of the fields. Then with worms, this year I did have an issue with worms, but it was because the fluctuation in the temperature went from such extremes that, it was basically the lambs. And I worm dosed them, but I kept them in for the lethal 6 days. Because if I turned them out after worming them, the dung beetles would land and eat the dung and then die. And then after 6 days, the death penalty is gone. And it can, after that, it can weaken the dung beetles, but it's not so bad. And because I haven't done it all that often over the last few years, the dung beetle population has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. Other health issues. Oh, we could talk all day about health issues, but I am finding that as the diversity of the sward increases every year, the sheep are getting healthier and healthier and healthier, and less likely to be sick. I mean, which is the best medicine, as it were.
Okay, great. And Anthony Slattery asks, hi Susanna, the land here has always been overgrazed by horses. At the moment I'm trying to use paddocks to allow the land to rest. I would say I have at least 20 species in the meadow, but would there be any point in sowing in more varieties? What do you think?
Well, it depends on the varieties that you have. If you know what varieties you have, what's a fantastic person to go onto YouTube and watch is Dr. Christina Jones. She was at the conference last autumn that was in Portlaoise, and there's videos of hers, and she always says the more species you have, diverse species you have in your sward, the better it is. So the more the merrier, as it were. For example, vetches, there's vetches that come all through the year. You've got the purple vetches, you've got the tufted vetches, you have the crown vetches, you have the, I can't think off the top of my head, but the vetches are, varieties come all through the year. There's also clovers that come all through the year. Then there's different kinds of daisies that come all through the year. Then you have the sunflower or hawkweed dandelion family, which also have ones that come all through the year and all have different medicinal aspects. So, I mean, if you Google hawkweeds, Google will say which one. There's so many different varieties. So in essence, if you have 25 different species, that is absolutely brilliant. but see how many more you can get in there. And a way to do that is around this time of year is collect seeds wherever you're going of grass seeds. And what you want to do is when you have a grass seeds in your bucket that you're collecting, make sure it doesn't ferment itself. So you want to keep it dry and keep spinning it with your hand while you're collecting it, so that, because you want no heat, you don't want to cook the seeds. And I've been collecting seeds for years and years and years and years and years now. And you can collect them in bunches and shake them in the bucket and then spread them in naked areas or patches just before you move the animals. When it's a damp day, their hooves kind of put the seeds into the soil and do the contact. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to worry about plowing or any of those kind of things. But definitely paddock grazing works a treat. That's how I do my horses. They're paddock grazed. They're moved every day. And the field that they're in now, if I wanted to, I could go all the way back to the beginning and start them grazing, paddock grazing again. But I'm going to move them into a different field, because horses are notorious for finding their favorite patch to graze, and will keep grazing that and eliminating species, and they'll manure in the same place all the time. Whereas if you do the paddocks and move them constantly, it's the same with cattle, same with sheep. If you're moving them constantly, they will spread out their manure, which then spreads out the dung beetle, which spreads out the dung beetle doing its activity of going down, bringing up the minerals, the plant roots going down, bringing up more minerals themselves. So it's kind of it is more work, but I find it a heck of a lot more rewarding, especially when you see the wildlife. There was a dairy farmer a few years ago when I was doing one of my videos of the farm, and he was like, "Oh my God, do you live in the Garden of Eden?" And I was like, that's a wonderful thing to say, but it's a heck of a lot of work to make the Garden of Eden like this. But it's rewarding. It is very rewarding. And I do have to say, I don't have children. So, you could say farming is my children.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Perfect. So the next question I have, do you think regeneration could, this from Nick Renison, do you think regenerative farming could become the norm in time?
Absolutely. Good. Are you going funny? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Woo!
Sorry, Suzanna, there's someone else that's thing I'm trying to mute. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yep. Yeah, sorry.
What was the question? Yes, regenerative farming could absolutely become the norm. And because regenerative farming, in mining the soil and with the multi-species sward, there's more money in the farmer's pocket, because they're not spending it on fertilizers or herbicides or wormers, which also take man hours, which also compacts the soil. Basically, you end up with more money in your pocket. Your bank balance is better. It's not about how much milk you produce. It's about how much money you still have in your back pocket. And a great example is my grandfather in the 1960s. He was a market gardener. The walled garden and the orchard was how he made his income, is selling fruit and vegetables. And the French apples, the golden delicious, were coming in and eliminating his market. So he went to the equivalent of the Teagasc advisor in that day and said, how can I make my crop more financially viable and as good as or better than the French apples that are coming in and being bought over my apples? And the advisor said, well, if you spray it with this, fertilize it with this, spray it with that, do this, do that, to the point my grandfather did all this. He bought in all this stuff. He didn't have a tractor, so the poor donkey was brought in with tanks on it, and the poor donkey turned orange because of the sprays. The donkey lived to a great age, by the way, called Ishbel. Anyway, they sprayed the orchard, they fertilized it, and that year he had a bumper crop of apples, the most beautiful apples, and he sold the most apples he'd ever sold. But when he did a calculation from the year before, where he had no inputs but traditional farmyard fertilizer, and the year that he put all the inputs in, he discovered he'd actually made more money the year before than the year that he'd done all the inputs, because of the expense of all the inputs. And the magnificence of regenerative farming and a multi-species sward and mob grazing is you don't have those inputs, and it's a different form of management, so that you don't have to reseed or fertilize or any of those kind of things. So I think it is the future, because it makes more sense for the farmer in the long run.
Okay, perfect. This is from Gillian Lynch. Suzanna, do you participate in any of the environmental schemes? If so, how do you find them?
No, I was in REPS a number of years ago. I don't get any EU funding. I have not had any leadership funding. I don't get any Irish government funding because we can't slot into any of those kind of things. So we did have REPS, and when REPS finished, the next one we looked at, the glass scheme, and we were too small. It didn't fit into, there was nothing that would have worked. So I'm not dependent on any subsidies from the EU or the Irish government.
This is from Fergal Costello. Suzanna, do you see a potential in alpaca farming in Ireland?
Oh, there's quite a few alpaca farmers already. I think if there is a possibility, if you're in a location where you can take alpaca walks, and there's people in the Wicklow Hills, alpaca farmers there, and in the Slieve Blooms that have alpacas that they take for picnics. And you would definitely need to work very hard on your social media aspect to get the yarn and everything done, because it's very expensive. You have to send it off to the UK. None of the mills here in Ireland can process alpaca fleeces into yarn, so it has to be sent. My alpaca fleeces get sent away. So the potential is there, but you have to have the right location for it. And I think in the UK there are alpaca sausages and things like that, but Ireland is a much more conservative diet, so I don't think people would attune to alpaca sausages or meat and things like that.
Okay, this is a question from James Foley. Suzanna, a point of a lot of critics have of diverse multi-species swards is that it hasn't been well proven enough in Ireland. What are your thoughts on adapting foreign research like the Jenna project experiment in Germany?
I think that they're fantastic. The Jenna project in Germany is very interesting and well worth it. I mean, a lot of Irish farming that is happening now has come from research that was in New Zealand. So I don't see why we can't take the experimentation and the philosophies and the discoveries and the techniques from the Jenna project in Germany and apply them here. If we applied New Zealand logic to Ireland, why can't we do the same from another area? There's also the Pasture for Life group in the UK, which I'm a member of. And you have to be a paid member. And the discussion group is magnificent. It does cost £100 to join, but you can, so many people in the Pasture for Life group are experienced from decades of multi-species swords and things like that. So you can ask an innocuous, seemingly idiot-like question, and they will respond. A lot of people will respond. It's a very interesting thing. So that's Pasture for Life. And yeah, research from other countries, I think, is very, very important to take into account and not to ignore it. No country's research is perfect. And I think if you use common sense and you read from a lot of different takes, you can understand. And with the climate change and the droughts we're having a lot of very similar weather patterns to what some of the Jenna Project probably was exposed to. So I hope that answers Jane's question.
Yeah, okay. Well, Suzanna, we're coming to the end of the hour here, and it's amazing what you've achieved with, I suppose, conventionally a small farm, but I mean, very diverse, and you've, spread out so much and used a lot of skill sets there. It's amazing. If you were to give farmers one top tip you think any farmer across the country could do and could add to their farm, what would your top tip be in terms of nature and regenerative farming?
My top tip and regenerative farming, I think, so would you be quiet?
Don't get a little dog.
I think sowing a multi-species sward that has more than 25 species in it and learning how to manage that in a mob grazing fashion. I think the beef plan, if they took on regenerative grazing, they would have a lot more income in their back pockets. For example, sorry, I've got a puppy who's now grabbing my scarf. I think diverse sward and mob grazing would be huge because it would deal with impaction, it would deal with land health, soil health, animal health, and human health. Combine that with the dung beetle and improving that, and you end up getting incredible biodiversity of both flora and fauna within a farm. And then it would be planting more hedgerows and things like that, because the shelter from the elements, be it the sun's heat, the sleet, the snow, the rain, also adds to the fungus and microbial life, which is hugely important to the root structures of a diverse sward. So it's all kind of tied in and knitted together. And this would be a really good book. Can you see? Yep. That would be a really good book that gives people a good idea of how to go about it. And the Cotswold seed stuff, if you go to the back of their website and you tick every single one of the little catalogs and they post them to you, is a mine of information.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you for your superb contribution. If anyone wants to see a 5-minute video about Suzanna's farm, it's up on the Farming for Nature website. Also, Suzanna, if people want to contact you directly, they can find you through social media, on Twitter, you were saying, and Instagram. Is there any? Yeah.
On Instagram, I'm Zwartblas Ireland. On Twitter, I'm Zwartblas IE. And on Facebook, you can always join our the Regenerative Farming Ireland group, and there's a lot of really good farmers on that, which can definitely add a lot more information than what I have. I mean, it's always good to have many people to talk to, because a diversity of experience means that you can thread your way through and find what suits best for your land. Because I mean, in Ireland, we have so many different land types that what I'm farming won't work for somebody up in the mountains of Mourne, or down in, by the sea somewhere in Cork. You just, you need to find people within your area to ask questions of. And that's what's so great about Pasture for Life, is that the diversity of farmers on it, because they also have tillage farmers on it who do like 3 or 4 different crops, and they have the harvesters that can separate out the peas from the barley from the etc. So I mean, it's, the information is out there. It's which is so fantastic.
Brilliant, excellent. Well, thank you for your brilliant contribution and sharing your knowledge, and hopefully giving others something to think about how they can farm differently. You know, it's great to have people like yourself as eloquent, you know, spokespersons for nature. So thank you. And if anyone knows someone who would like to see tonight's session, it's been recorded, so it will be up on YouTube in the next day or so, and you can find it through our website, farmingfornature.ie. Also next week we have farmer from County Mayo, Fergal Ní Cuineáin, who will be talking about how to build habitats for species on his farm. So if you're interested in joining us, please register again through our website, farmingfornature.ie. Meanwhile, thanks again, Suzanna, amazing. Thanks for joining us tonight, and thank you everyone else, and hopefully we'll see you all again next week. Goodbye. Thanks,
Bye.
Suzanna. Bye-bye.